go through me!
30,000 feet in the air, in the narrow aisle of Flight 447, a 12-year-old girl stood trembling. But she didn't move. Couldn't move. Wouldn't move. In front of her, a woman's face was twisted with rage, her perfectly manicured finger jabbing toward the window seat behind Abigail's small frame. The woman's voice cut through the cabin like a knife. "Get that diseased child away from me. She's contaminating the whole plane." Other passengers had turned to stare. Some were recording on their phones. The cabin felt smaller suddenly, the recycled air thick with tension. Behind Abigail, her best friend Sienna sat curled against the window, tears streaming down her 11-year-old face, her body racked with pain. Abigail's hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. She was terrified. But when she spoke, her voice came out steady, clear, defiant. "You'll have to go through me first." But how did we get here? How did a normal flight turn into this nightmare? To understand that, we need to go back. 6 hours earlier. To where this whole thing started. The airport terminal at 5:47 a.m. was quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the occasional announcement echoing through empty gates. Most travelers were still groggy, clutching coffee cups, staring at their phones. But in the corner of gate B17, one passenger was wide awake. Abigail sat cross-legged in an uncomfortable airport chair, a worn medical journal spread across her lap. Not a children's book. Not a phone game. A medical journal. The kind with diagrams of blood cells and pharmaceutical terminology that most adults would struggle to understand. She was reading about vaso-occlusive crises, her finger tracing the words as she committed them to memory. At 12 years old, Abigail looked younger than she was. Small for her age, with her hair pulled back in 2 neat puffs, wearing a purple hoodie and light-up sneakers that seemed at odds with the serious expression on her face. But if you looked closer, if you paid attention, you'd see something in her eyes. A maturity. A knowledge. A weight that children shouldn't have to carry. She'd been reading for 20 minutes when she heard it. A voice that made her look up with a smile that transformed her entire face. "Abby." Sienna came through the terminal entrance like a burst of sunshine, despite the early hour. She was 11, wearing a yellow sundress and white sneakers, her hair in intricate braids that had probably taken hours. On her wrist, a medical alert bracelet caught the light. She was beaming, practically bouncing with excitement, but Abigail noticed immediately what others might miss. The slight pallor beneath her brown skin. The careful way she moved. The tightness around her eyes that meant she was already in pain, even if she was trying to hide it. Behind her, moving more slowly, came her grandmother. Mrs. Lorraine Whitfield was 68 years old and carried herself with a dignity that demanded respect. She wore a navy blue traveling suit, sensible shoes and pearl earrings. Her silver hair was styled perfectly. But her hands gripped the handle of her rolling suitcase tightly, and her eyes darted around the airport with barely concealed anxiety. Abigail jumped up, closing the journal and tucking it into her backpack as Sienna rushed over and hugged her. "I can't believe we're actually doing this," Sienna said, her voice high with excitement. "Boston. A real plane ride. And you're coming with me." Mrs. Whitfield reached them, setting down her bag with a sigh of relief. She looked at Abigail with the kind of warmth usually reserved for family. "Thank the Lord you're here, baby," she said, pulling Abigail into a hug. "I don't know what we'd do without you." This wasn't just politeness. Mrs. Whitfield meant every word. Because 2 years ago, when Sienna had been diagnosed with sickle cell anemia, their whole world had turned upside down. The hospital visits. The pain crises. The fear. And through it all, Abigail had been there. See, Abigail's mother was an ER nurse at County General. She worked night shifts, double shifts, whatever it took to keep the lights on in their small apartment. And she'd raised Abigail with one clear message: knowledge is power, especially when it comes to health. So when Sienna got diagnosed, when the doctor started throwing around terms like hemoglobin, and sickling, and vaso-occlusive, while other kids their age were learning dance moves, Abigail was learning medicine. She'd become Sienna's medical buddy. She knew every medication, every dosage, every warning sign. She knew that hydroxyurea had to be taken at the same time every day. She knew that dehydration could trigger a crisis. She knew that Sienna's pain wasn't her being dramatic or weak, it was real, it was cellular, it was her blood cells literally changing shape and blocking blood flow. She knew because she'd made it her business to know. Because that's what you do for the people you love. "Did you sleep okay?" Abigail asked, studying Sienna's face. Sienna's smile faltered just slightly. "Not really. My knees were hurting. And my back." Mrs. Whitfield's expression tightened with worry, but Abigail just nodded, already reaching into her backpack. Did you take your morning medication? Not yet, Grandma has it. I've got it right here, Mrs. Whitfield said, fumbling with her large purse, her arthritic hands making the simple task difficult. I packed everything the doctor said, double-checked the list 3 times. Let me help, Abigail said gently, and Mrs. Whitfield handed over the medication bag with visible relief. This was their dynamic. Had been for 2 years. Abigail, the 12-year-old who somehow became the calm in every storm. Mrs. Whitfield, who loved her granddaughter fiercely but was overwhelmed by the medical complexity of it all. And Sienna, who was brave and bright and just wanted to be a normal kid, even though her body had other plans. They were heading to Boston because Sienna's local doctors had recommended she see a specialist. Dr. Patricia Okonkwo at Boston Children's Hospital was supposedly one of the best pediatric hematologists in the country. This appointment had taken 6 months to get. Mrs. Whitfield had been saving for over a year to afford the flights and hotel. I've never been on a plane before, Mrs. Whitfield admitted quietly, looking toward the windows where planes were visible on the tarmac. Never had a reason to leave Georgia until now. It's going to be amazing, Sienna said, her excitement bubbling back up despite her discomfort. We're going to fly. Like birds. And Abby's with us, so nothing bad can happen. Abigail felt the weight of that trust. The absolute faith in Sienna's voice. She squeezed her friend's hand. Nothing bad is going to happen, she promised, having no idea how wrong she was about to be. They boarded 40 minutes later, joining the shuffling line of passengers making their way down the narrow aisle of the Boeing 737. Coach section, row 32, seats D, E, and F. Sienna got the window seat, Abigail took the middle, and Mrs. Whitfield settled into the aisle, already looking uncomfortable in the cramped space. Abigail helped Sienna buckle her seatbelt, then arranged their carry-on items in the most accessible way. Medication bag within easy reach. Water bottle in the seat pocket. Sienna's favorite book ready if she needed a distraction from pain. That's when she heard it. A voice from across the aisle, pitched just loud enough to be heard but trying to sound like a private conversation. Of course we're in the most crowded section of the plane. I specifically requested more space. Abigail glanced over. Seat 32C across the narrow aisle held a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a luxury catalog. Designer blazer. Expensive jewelry that caught the overhead lights. Her blonde hair was styled in perfect waves, her makeup flawless despite the early hour. Veronica Ashford, though Abigail didn't know her name yet, was scrolling through her phone with an expression of perpetual annoyance. Next to her, in 32B, her husband Gerald sat hunched over his own phone, barely acknowledging her complaint. He wore a business suit and the exhausted expression of a man who'd heard this particular complaint many times before. Veronica's eyes swept over their row, lingering on Sienna and Abigail with an expression that made Abigail's stomach tighten. It wasn't just annoyance. There was something else there. Something colder. Excuse me, Veronica said, not to them but to the flight attendant passing by. How full is this flight? Are there any available seats in a less crowded area? The flight attendant, a young Asian American man with kind eyes and a name tag that read, Derek, smiled professionally. We're completely full today, ma'am. But if you need anything during the flight, just let me know. Veronica's lips pressed into a thin line. She made a show of adjusting her seat, her elbow deliberately encroaching into the aisle space, as if she could physically create more distance between herself and the neighboring row. Sienna shifted in her seat, wincing slightly. Abigail noticed immediately. What hurts? She whispered. My joints. Knees mostly. And I'm really thirsty. Before Mrs. Whitfield could even reach for her purse, Abigail had already flagged down Derek. Could we get some water, please? And do you have any extra pillows? Derek's smile became more genuine. Of course. Give me just a minute. While they waited, Abigail helped Sienna adjust her position, showing her how to angle her legs to reduce the pressure on her knees. She pulled out the medication bag, checking the time on the airport clock visible through the window. Okay, it's been 8 hours since your last dose. You can take another one now. Mrs. Whitfield watched Abigail work with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. This child, this beautiful, brilliant child, had given up so much of her own childhood to help them. While other 12-year-olds were worried about social media and school dances, Abigail was tracking medication schedules and reading medical journals. Derek returned with water and pillows, his eyes showing genuine concern when he saw the medical alert bracelet on Sienna's wrist. Is there anything else I can get for you? We have a medical kit on board if needed. We should be okay, Abigail said with a confidence that seemed beyond her years. But thank you. It's good to know. From across the aisle, Veronica was watching this entire exchange with undisguised disgust. She leaned toward her husband, but her voice carried clearly. Irresponsible, she muttered. Bringing sick children on planes. Some people have no consideration for others. Gerald glanced up from his phone briefly, then returned to his screen without comment. Mrs. Whitfield heard it. Her back stiffened, her hands clenching the armrests. But she said nothing, just stared straight ahead, her jaw tight. Abigail heard it too. She felt anger flash hot in her chest, but she pushed it down. Now wasn't the time. Sienna needed her to stay calm. She helped Sienna take her medication, opened the water bottle for her, made sure she drank slowly. The cabin was filling up now, the sounds of luggage being shoved into overhead compartments, of families settling in, of flight attendants going through their safety checks. The captain's voice came over the intercom, welcoming them to Flight 447 to Boston, estimated flight time 2 hours and 43 minutes. As the plane began to push back from the gate, Sienna reached over and grabbed Abigail's hand. Thank you for coming with me, she said softly. I know you had to miss school. Are you kidding? Abigail squeezed back. I wouldn't miss this for anything. The engines roared to life. The plane began to taxi toward the runway. Sienna's grip tightened as they picked up speed, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and excitement. This was it. Her first flight. Her first time leaving Georgia. Her first time feeling like maybe, despite everything, she could have adventures like other kids. Mrs. Whitfield reached over and placed her hand over both of theirs, creating a chain of connection. The plane lifted off, and for a moment, everything was beautiful. The ground fell away. The morning sun broke through the clouds, painting everything gold. Sienna gasped with delight, pressing her face to the window. We're flying. Abby, we're actually flying. And for those few perfect seconds, Abigail let herself believe her promise. Nothing bad was going to happen. She had no idea that in less than an hour she'd be standing in that aisle, trembling but defiant, facing down hatred she'd never experienced so directly before. She had no idea that the woman across the aisle, currently scrolling through her phone with that pinched expression, was about to make this flight a nightmare. She had no idea that she was about to discover just how much courage a 12-year-old girl could have when the person she loved most was in danger. But she was about to find out. If you're already invested in Abigail's story, make sure you hit that subscribe button, because what happens next is going to shock you. This little girl's courage is about to be tested in ways no child should ever have to face. And here's my question for you. Have you ever witnessed someone being treated unfairly and had to decide whether to speak up or stay silent? What did you do? Let me know in the comments below, because Abigail's about to make a choice that will change everything. The seatbelt sign dinged off. The flight attendants began their service. And in seat 32E, Abigail sat holding her best friend's hand, completely unaware that the worst was yet to come. 45 minutes into the flight, everything changed. Abigail was reading to Sienna from her book, trying to keep her distracted, when she felt it. The change in Sienna's breathing. It was subtle at first, just a slight shift in rhythm, but Abigail had learned to notice these things. Had trained herself to catch the warning signs before they became emergencies. She looked up. Sienna's eyes had gone distant, unfocused. Her hand, which had been relaxed in Abigail's, suddenly clenched tight. So tight that Abigail felt her fingers go numb. Sienna? Sienna didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Her other hand moved to her chest, gripping the fabric of her yellow sundress, her knuckles going pale with the force of it. Her breathing became shallow, rapid. Small whimpering sounds escaped her throat. Mrs. Whitfield saw it at the same moment. Her granddaughter, her baby, curling in on herself like she was trying to protect her body from an attack that was coming from inside. "Oh God," Mrs. Whitfield whispered, her voice shaking. "Oh no, not now, please, not now." She fumbled for her purse with trembling hands, trying to open the medication bag, but her arthritis had other ideas. The zipper wouldn't cooperate. Her fingers kept slipping. Panic was making everything worse. "Sienna, baby, hold on, Grandma's getting your medicine." But Abigail was already moving. While Mrs. Whitfield struggled with the bag, while other passengers around them continued their conversations oblivious to the crisis unfolding, this 12-year-old girl transformed. Gone was the kid reading stories. In her place was someone who'd spent 2 years preparing for exactly this moment. "Mrs. Whitfield, let me." Abigail's voice was calm, steady. She took the medication bag gently, found the right prescription bottle on the first try, checked the label twice to be absolutely certain, and had it open in seconds. Sienna was crying now. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but the kind of crying that comes from a pain so deep, so complete that your body doesn't know what else to do. Tears streamed down her face. Her whole body was rigid, every muscle tensed against the agony. For those of you who don't know what a sickle cell pain crisis feels like, imagine this. Your blood cells, which are normally round and smooth, suddenly change shape. They become hard, sticky, crescent-shaped, like tiny knives. And these misshapen cells get stuck in your blood vessels, blocking the flow of blood and oxygen to your tissues. The pain is excruciating, bone deep, relentless. Some patients describe it as feeling like their bones are being crushed from the inside. Others say it's like being stabbed repeatedly. And there's no off switch. No way to make it stop except to manage it, treat it, wait it out. And Sienna, at 11 years old, was experiencing this 30,000 feet in the air. Abigail pressed the call button for the flight attendant, then turned her full attention to Sienna. "Look at me," she said, her voice cutting through Sienna's panic. "Sienna, eyes on me. Right now." Sienna's eyes found hers, wide with fear and pain. "Breathe with me. In through your nose for counts. Can you do that?" Sienna tried, her breath hitching, broken. "That's okay, try again. In 2, 3, 4. Good. Now out, 2, 3, 4. While she guided Sienna through breathing exercises, muscle memory from dozens of hospital visits, Abigail shook out the medication and held it up with water. "This is going to help, but you need to take it. Can you swallow for me?" Sienna nodded, her jaw clenched tight. She managed to get the pill down, choking slightly, but it went down. Around them, other passengers were starting to notice. The woman in front of them turned around. A man across the aisle leaned over to see what was happening. Anne Veronica Ashford, who'd been scrolling through her phone, suddenly looked up. What she saw was a young black girl in visible distress, tears on her face, body trembling, and she reacted in the worst possible way. Veronica stood up so fast her seat belt buckle clattered. She backed away from her seat like she'd seen something contagious, something dangerous. Her face twisted with disgust and fear. "Is she contagious?" Her voice was loud, cutting through the ambient noise of the plane. Other passengers turned to look. "What's wrong with her?" Derek, the flight attendant, was already on his way down the aisle, moving quickly but calmly. He arrived at their row and immediately assessed the situation with the practiced eye of someone trained for medical emergencies. But before he could speak, Abigail looked up at Veronica. Her face was calm, but her eyes were hard. "Sickle cell pain crisis. She needs her pain medication, hydration, and to stay calm. It's not contagious. You can't catch it by sitting near someone. It's genetic." She said it clearly, loudly enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. Educational but pointed. Then she turned back to Sienna, dismissing Veronica entirely. Derek knelt down in the aisle, his voice gentle. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Sienna," Abigail answered for her friend who was still crying. "She has sickle cell anemia. She took her hydroxyurea this morning at 6:30. She just took her pain medication 2 minutes ago. She needs to stay hydrated and warm. The medication will take about 15 to 20 minutes to start working." Derek looked at this 12-year-old girl rattling off medical information like a nurse giving a shift report, and something shifted in his expression. "Respect. Okay. I'm going to get some warm blankets and more water. You're doing great." But Veronica wasn't done. She turned to Derek, her voice rising with indignation. "I paid for a peaceful flight, not to sit next to a medical emergency. Move them or move me. This is unacceptable." Derek stood, turning to face her with professional courtesy that had an edge of steel beneath it. "Ma'am, the child has a managed medical condition. She's not a danger to anyone. I need you to return to your seat." "Managed? She's clearly not managing anything. Look at her." Veronica gestured wildly at Sienna. "I want to speak to the captain. This is completely unacceptable. If I'd known there was going to be a sick child on this flight, I would have taken a different one." Mrs. Whitfield, who'd been focused entirely on her granddaughter, finally looked up. Her eyes met Veronica's, and the fury in them could have melted steel. "She is 11 years old and she is in pain. Show some compassion." "Compassion? I have compassion for the rest of us who just wanted a normal flight." Derek held up his hand. "Ma'am, I need you to lower your voice and sit down. If you continue to disturb other passengers, we'll have a different conversation." Veronica opened her mouth to argue, saw the warning in Derek's eyes, and sat down with an angry huff. But this wasn't over. Not even close. Derek returned moments later with warm blankets, extra water, and a glucose pack from the medical kit. He helped Abigail tuck the blankets around Sienna, showed Mrs. Whitfield how to adjust the air vent to keep Sienna warm. He was professional, kind, and thorough. Sienna's medication was starting to work. The edge of her pain was dulling, though she still gripped Abigail's hand like a lifeline. Her breathing was slower now, more controlled. The crisis wasn't over, but it was manageable. And that's when Abigail heard the clicking sound. She looked over. Veronica had her phone out, angled toward them, clearly taking photos. Or video. Her expression was one of vindication, like she was documenting evidence of some great injustice done to her. "Why are you taking pictures of us?" Abigail's voice was quiet, but it carried. Several passengers looked over. Veronica didn't even have the grace to look embarrassed. "Evidence. For my lawyer. You people always play the victim card, and I'm making sure there's documentation of how my flight was disrupted. You people." Those two words hung in the air like poison. Mrs. Whitfield's hands clenched the armrests so hard her knuckles went white. "Please don't speak to the children." Her voice was quiet, controlled, but shaking with barely suppressed rage. This woman who'd raised 6 children, who'd buried a husband and a daughter, who'd seen more in her 68 years than Veronica could imagine, was asking, pleading, for basic human decency. Veronica turned to her with a smile that wasn't a smile at all. "I'll speak however I want. I'm a paying passenger. Maybe if parents like you kept sick kids at home, the rest of us wouldn't have to deal with this. Parents like you kept sick kids at home. The rest of us." Every word was a calculated barb designed to hurt, to diminish, to other. Gerald, Veronica's husband, finally looked up from his phone. He put his hand on his wife's arm. "Ronnie, that's enough." But he didn't pull her back. Didn't tell her she was wrong. Didn't apologize. Just a weak attempt at de-escalation that fooled no one. Then he went right back to his phone, absolving himself of responsibility. By now, other passengers were paying attention. The man in 33C, directly behind Mrs. Whitfield, had been watching the whole thing unfold. Trevor Michaels was his name, though no one knew it yet. He was in his 30s, wearing a sharp business suit, and he'd been trying to work on his laptop. But he'd heard everything. Seen everything. He leaned forward, his voice firm. "Ma'am, you need to calm down. That little girl is clearly in pain, and you're making everything worse." Veronica whirled on him, and whatever mask of civility she'd been wearing completely shattered. "Oh, of course you'd take their side." The meaning was clear. The subtext wasn't even sub. And Trevor's expression hardened, but before he could respond, something else happened. Sienna's crisis, which had been stabilizing, suddenly peaked. The medication wasn't working fast enough. The pain was overwhelming her young body. She couldn't hold back anymore. She started crying audibly, these heartbreaking sobs that tore through the cabin. It hurts so much, make it stop, please make it stop." Mrs. Whitfield was crying now too, helpless, watching her granddaughter suffer and unable to fix it. And Veronica Ashford stood up. She stood up in the middle of the aisle and announced, loud enough for half the plane to hear, "I'm not sitting near this anymore. She could have Ebola for all we know." The cabin went silent. Even the engine noise seemed to fade into the background. Passengers stared at her in shock. Someone gasped. Several people pulled out their phones, starting to record. Ebola. She'd really said Ebola. About an 11-year-old black girl with a well-known genetic disorder. And something inside Abigail snapped. She'd been calm through the crisis. Calm while helping Sienna. Calm while explaining the medical facts. Calm while being photographed and insulted. But this was too much. Abigail stood up. She was small for 12. In her light-up sneakers, she barely came up to Veronica's shoulder. Her purple hoodie had a juice stain on the sleeve. She looked like a child. But when she spoke, her voice carried through the entire cabin with crystalline clarity. "She has sickle cell anemia. It's a genetic blood disorder that affects how red blood cells form. You can't catch it by sitting near someone. You can't catch it at all. It's inherited. Maybe if you spent less time being afraid of black people and more time reading, you'd know that." The silence that followed was deafening. Veronica's face went from pale to bright red in seconds. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. "How dare you? You little..." "Ma'am?" Derek was there instantly, his voice no longer diplomatic but commanding. "I need you to return to your seat now. She just disrespected me. Are you going to let a child speak to an adult that way? I want her thrown off this plane. I want all of them thrown off." Abigail didn't flinch. Didn't back down. She stood there in the aisle, this tiny 12-year-old girl, and looked Veronica Ashford dead in the eyes. "Respect is earned. And you haven't earned anything but disgust." For a moment, Veronica looked like she might actually lunge at Abigail. Her hands clenched into fists. Her face twisted with rage. But Derek stepped between them and his expression made it clear that would be a very bad idea. Then from behind them a slow clap started. Trevor was clapping. Slowly, deliberately. And then the woman next to him joined in. And the teenage boy across the aisle. And the elderly couple in row 34. Within seconds, a dozen passengers were applauding this 12-year-old girl who just stood up to a grown woman's racism and ignorance. Veronica looked around at the applauding passengers, at the phones recording her, at Derek's stern expression, and something in her broke. She grabbed her designer bag and stormed toward the bathroom at the back of the plane, her heels clicking angrily on the floor. Gerald finally unplugged from his phone long enough to mutter an apology nobody believed and hurried after his wife. As the applause faded, Abigail sat back down. And only then did she start shaking. The adrenaline that had kept her standing, kept her voice steady, suddenly drained away. She was 12 years old. She just confronted an adult. In front of dozens of people. Her hands trembled in her lap. Sienna, still in pain but aware of what had just happened, reached over and squeezed Abigail's hand. "You were amazing," she whispered through tears. Mrs. Whitfield pulled Abigail into a tight hug, this woman who'd seen real courage in her lifetime recognizing it in this child. "You are so brave." Derek knelt down again, this time looking at Abigail with something like awe. "That was incredibly brave. And you were absolutely right. Are you okay?" Abigail nodded, not trusting her voice. Trevor leaned over from behind them. "Hey, that was incredible. I'm Trevor Michaels and I'm an attorney. I recorded everything that woman said and did. If your grandmother wants it, she has my card." He handed a business card to Mrs. Whitfield, who took it with shaking hands. From a few rows back, another passenger, a black woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a press badge on her bag, leaned forward. "I'm Keisha Monroe. I'm a journalist. What that woman did, what she said, that's not okay. And what you did." She looked at Abigail with admiration. "That was heroic." But Abigail wasn't thinking about heroism. She was thinking about Sienna, who was still in pain. Still suffering. And nothing any of them had said or done made that better. If you're not subscribed yet, hit that button right now because this story is far from over. What happens next is going to shock you, and Abigail's courage is going to be tested in ways that will break your heart. And I want to know, if you were on that plane, would you have stood up and applauded Abigail? Or would you have stayed silent? Be honest with yourself and let me know in the comments, because sometimes the hardest thing is not staying silent when you should speak up. The bathroom door at the back of the plane was closed. Veronica was inside, probably trying to compose herself. But this wasn't over. The storm had only just begun. And what none of them knew yet was that Sienna's condition was about to get much worse. 20 minutes passed. 20 minutes of relative calm. Sienna's medication had taken the edge off her pain. She was resting against the window, eyes half closed, breathing more easily. Mrs. Whitfield held her hand, stroking her granddaughter's braids with gentle, repetitive motions. Abigail sat between them, vigilant, watching for any sign of change. Derek checked on them twice, brought more water, asked if they needed anything. The other passengers had returned to their books, their movies, their conversations. The drama seemed to be over. But Abigail couldn't shake the feeling in her gut. Something wasn't right. Sienna's color was off. Too pale. Almost gray beneath her brown skin. Her breathing was easier, yes, but something about it seemed wrong. Shallow. Like she wasn't getting enough oxygen even though she was breathing. "Sienna?" Abigail touched her friend's arm gently. "How are you feeling?" Sienna opened her eyes. They were unfocused, glassy. "Tired?" she whispered. "So tired. And cold. Why is it so cold?" Abigail's heart dropped. She reached up to adjust the air vent, but it was already closed. The cabin was warm. Too warm, if anything. Other passengers were in t-shirts, using the air vents to cool down. She pressed her hand to Sienna's forehead. It was cold and clammy. "Mrs. Whitfield." But Mrs. Whitfield had already seen it. The change in her granddaughter's face. The way her eyes weren't tracking properly. The slight blue tinge around her lips. And then Sienna started gasping. Not the controlled breathing from before. This was different. Desperate. Like she couldn't get enough air no matter how hard she tried. Her chest heaved. Her hands clutched at her throat, at her chest, at nothing. "Baby? Baby, what's wrong?" Mrs. Whitfield's voice rose with panic. "Sienna, stay with me." Sienna tried to answer but couldn't form words. Her eyes rolled back. Her body went rigid, then limp. Abigail's training kicked in even as terror flooded her system. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely press the call button, but she pressed it. Again and again and again. Derek. Derek. Her voice cut through the cabin like a knife. Passengers turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Derek was there in seconds, moving faster than Abigail thought possible. He took one look at Sienna and his professional calm cracked just slightly. What happened? She was stable and then she started gasping. Abigail's words tumbled out fast, precise despite her shaking. She's cold, clammy, lips are turning blue, she's not responsive. Derek, she needs oxygen and we might need to land. Derek didn't question her. Didn't dismiss her because she was 12. He pulled out his radio. This is Derek, I need the medical kit at 32D immediately. And I need to speak to the captain now. He knelt in front of Sienna, checked her pulse, her breathing, while Mrs. Whitfield sobbed. Please, please, not my baby, please God. Another flight attendant rushed over with the oxygen tank. Derek fitted the mask over Sienna's face with practiced efficiency, turning the flow up high. Sienna's chest kept heaving, fighting for air even with the oxygen. And then the announcement came over the intercom. The captain's voice, calm but urgent. If there is a doctor on board, please identify yourself to a flight attendant immediately. The words hung in the air like a death knell. Passengers looked around, whispered to each other. Some pulled out phones. And at the back of the plane, the bathroom door opened. Veronica Ashford stepped out, fixing her makeup, her composure restored. She took in the scene, the oxygen tank, the crying grandmother, the small crowd gathering. And instead of concern, instead of compassion, instead of basic human decency, she did something unforgivable. She pulled out her phone and started recording. Not to document a medical emergency for helpful purposes. Not to assist in any way. But to post. To complain. To make this moment of genuine crisis about her inconvenience. Her fingers flew over the screen, typing as she recorded video of Sienna's limp body, of Mrs. Whitfield's tears, of Abigail's terrified face. The caption was visible if you were close enough to see her screen, and Trevor, still in his seat directly behind the unfolding crisis, could see it perfectly. Trapped on plane with sick child. Flight ruined. This is what happens when people don't belong in first class. Oh wait, they're in coach where they belong. Hashtag flight nightmare, hashtag typical. She hit post. Just like that. No hesitation. No shame. She posted a video of an 11-year-old girl in medical crisis, with a caption dripping with racism and classism, and went back to her seat like she'd done nothing wrong. Trevor stared at her in absolute disbelief. Around him, other passengers who'd seen what she did looked horrified. Someone muttered, "Did she really just?" Someone else said, "That's disgusting." But there was no time to process it because something else was happening. A woman was pushing through from first class, moving with authority and purpose. She was in her 50s, white, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun. She wore expensive clothes but practical shoes, and she carried herself like someone used to being in charge. "I'm a doctor," she announced, reaching their row. "Dr. Lillian Cross. Let me through." Derek stepped aside immediately, relief flooding his features. Thank God. 11-year-old female, sickle cell anemia, experiencing severe pain crisis that's now progressed to respiratory distress. She's on oxygen but not responding well. Dr. Cross was already examining Sienna, her hands moving with confident precision. She checked her pulse, her pupils, listened to her breathing through the oxygen mask. "How long has she had sickle cell?" 2 years, Abigail answered immediately. Diagnosed at 9. She takes hydroxyurea, 500 milligrams daily, takes it at 6:30 every morning. She took her dose today at 6:27. She had a pain crisis about an hour ago, took her prescription pain medication, oxycodone, 5 milligrams, at. She checked the time on the seat back screen, 9:43. The crisis seemed to stabilize, but then about 5 minutes ago she started showing signs of acute chest syndrome. Rapid breathing, low oxygen saturation, chest pain, fever. Well, she felt cold, but that could be. Dr. Cross looked up at this 12-year-old girl rattling off medical information like she was presenting at rounds. "You know her case better than some nurses I work with. What's your name?" "Abigail. My mom's an ER nurse. Sienna's my best friend." Something shifted in Dr. Cross's expression. Respect. Recognition. She turned back to Sienna. "Okay, Abigail. Here's what's happening. Your friend is experiencing a severe vaso-occlusive crisis that's progressing to acute chest syndrome. That's a serious complication. Her red blood cells are clumping in her lungs, reducing oxygen flow. We need to keep her on high-flow oxygen, keep her hydrated, and she needs stronger pain management. She turned to Derek. What do you have in the medical kit? Basic pain management, some antibiotics, epinephrine. Give me whatever opioid you have. And we need to discuss an emergency landing. Derek nodded and rushed to get the supplies. Dr. Cross adjusted Sienna's oxygen, checked her vital signs again, all while speaking in a calm, steady voice that somehow made the terrifying situation feel manageable. Mrs. Whitfield was still crying, but quieter now, watching this doctor work with desperate hope in her eyes. And from across the aisle, Veronica's voice cut through the focused urgency. Finally, a real doctor. Not just some child playing nurse. Dr. Cross didn't even look up. She was administering medication through the four-port Derek had established, her focus entirely on her patient. But her voice, when she spoke, was colder than ice. That child probably saved her friend's life by knowing exactly what to communicate. She gave me a complete medical history in under 30 seconds. You, meanwhile, have been less than helpful. The words landed like a slap. Several passengers nearby actually gasped. Veronica's face went red, but before she could respond, Dr. Cross continued. In fact, if you could move away from the immediate area, you're blocking access. Thank you. It wasn't a request. It was a dismissal. Complete and total. Veronica retreated to her seat, humiliated, while Dr. Cross worked to stabilize Sienna. The stronger medication was beginning to work. Sienna's breathing, while still labored, was becoming more regular. Her eyes fluttered open behind the oxygen mask. She looked confused, scared, but present. You're okay, sweetheart? Dr. Cross said gently. I'm Dr. Cross. You're having a complication from your sickle cell, but we're managing it. You're going to be fine. Mrs. Whitfield let out a sob of relief. Abigail, who'd been holding herself together through sheer force of will, felt tears finally spill down her cheeks. Dr. Cross looked at Abigail and smiled. You did good. Really good. How old are you? 12. 12. And you want to be a doctor? Yes, ma'am. You're going to be an excellent one. The captain's voice came over the intercom again. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be making an emergency landing in Cleveland. Emergency medical services will meet us at the gate. We should be on the ground in approximately 15 minutes. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for early landing. The plane shifted, beginning its descent. Trevor, who'd been silent through all of this, watching, recording, taking everything in, finally stood up. He approached Abigail, careful not to interfere with Dr. Cross's work. That was incredibly brave, he said quietly. I'm Trevor Michaels. I'm an attorney, and I recorded everything that woman said and did. He showed Abigail his phone. Clear video. Veronica's face, her words, her actions, all time-stamped and documented. Your friend's grandmother might want this. What that woman did is actionable. Harassment. Creating a hostile environment. Possibly discrimination. If Mrs. Whitfield wants to pursue it, I'd be happy to help pro bono. Mrs. Whitfield looked up, tears still streaming down her face, but something fierce in her eyes now. I want it. I want all of it. Trevor nodded and sent the video to Mrs. Whitfield's email address right there. And then Keisha, the journalist, approached from a few rows back. She had her phone out too, but her expression was one of grim satisfaction. I'm Keisha Monroe. I write for the Boston Herald. I need you all to see something. She pulled up a social media post on her phone. Veronica's post. The one she'd made just minutes ago, filming Sienna in crisis. But it wasn't the post that was shocking. It was what happened to it. It's already going viral, Keisha said, but not the way she wanted. The post had been up for less than 10 minutes. It already had over 50,000 views. And the comments were brutal. This is the most heartless thing I've ever seen. Imagine being this cruel to a sick child. Someone find out who this woman is. She needs to be held accountable. This is straight up racism. That poor baby. Keisha scrolled down. Someone had already identified Veronica in the comments. Veronica Ashford, real estate developer, Ashford Properties LLC, Charleston, South Carolina. And that's when things really escalated. People were finding her business page, leaving one-star reviews in real time. The comments were pouring in hundreds per minute. Would never do business with someone so hateful. Imagine this is how she treats a sick child. How does she treat her clients? Absolutely disgusting behavior. Avoid this company at all costs. Her personal social media accounts were being discovered. Old posts were being screenshotted, analyzed, showing patterns of problematic behavior. The internet had turned its full attention on Veronica Ashford, and it was merciless. Keisha turned her phone around so the passengers nearby could see. "The internet always sees," she said loud enough that Veronica could hear. "And it never forgets." Across the aisle, Veronica was staring at her own phone with an expression of growing horror. Her notifications were exploding. Hundreds, then thousands. Her face went from red to pale in seconds. Gerald, who'd been oblivious through most of the flight, finally looked at his wife's screen. "Ronnie, what did you post?" His voice was sharp, alarmed. This wasn't his usual passive deflection. He could see the numbers, the comments, the reviews, the damage happening in real time. Veronica's hands were shaking now. I didn't think. I was just venting." "You were venting about a child in medical crisis?" Gerald grabbed the phone from her hands, read the caption, watched the video. His face went white. "Ronnie, what have you done?" Other passengers were watching now, not even trying to hide it. Some were on their own phones, clearly looking up the viral post, adding their own comments to the growing firestorm. The teenage boy across the aisle held up his phone so his friend could see. "Dude, this lady's getting destroyed. Look at this, her business page went from 4 stars to 1.3 in like 5 minutes. His friend whistled low. "That's what she gets for being racist to a kid." Keisha, still standing in the aisle, looked directly at Veronica. "You didn't think we'd see a grown woman bullying a sick child and her 12-year-old protector? You didn't think there would be consequences?" She shook her head. "The internet always sees. And when you put hate out into the world, especially directed at children, especially with racism as blatant as yours, the internet doesn't just see. It responds." Veronica looked around at all the faces staring at her. Some disgusted. Some satisfied. Some just curious to see what would happen next. She opened her mouth to say something, anything, but no words came out. Her perfect makeup was smudged now. Her designer clothes suddenly looked garish instead of expensive. Her carefully constructed image was crumbling in real time, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Gerald was typing frantically on his phone, probably trying to do damage control, but it was too late. The internet had made its judgment. Derek returned to check on Sienna, saw the secondary drama unfolding, and made a decision. "Ma'am," he said to Veronica, his voice hard, "when we land, airport security will want to speak with you regarding your behavior on this flight. I've filed a report, and several passengers have indicated they'll be providing statements. I suggest you have a lawyer ready." Veronica's eyes went wide. This was really happening. It wasn't just internet comments. There would be real consequences. Legal consequences. Dr. Cross, still monitoring Sienna but hearing everything, added without looking up. "I'll be providing a statement too. As a medical professional, I can attest to the harm caused by your behavior during a medical emergency." The plane was descending now, the ground visible through the windows. Sienna was stable, breathing more easily, the medication and oxygen doing their work. She was going to be okay. She was going to make it. Abigail held her friend's hand and felt the weight of the last hour crash over her. She'd stood up to an adult. She'd saved her friend's life. She'd been brave when everything in her wanted to be small and scared. Trevor leaned over once more. "You should be proud of yourself. What you did today. That took courage most adults don't have." Mrs. Whitfield pulled Abigail close, kissed her forehead. "You're an angel, baby. My angel." Dr. Cross checked Sienna's vitals one more time, then looked at Abigail with something like awe. "Have you ever heard of the youth medicine program at Boston Children's Hospital?" Abigail shook her head. "It's for exceptional young people interested in medicine. We bring them in, let them shadow doctors, learn, get hands-on experience. I run the program." She pulled out a business card from her wallet. "When you're ready, high school age, you call me. I want you in my program." Abigail took the card with trembling hands, hardly believing what she was hearing. The plane touched down with a slight bump. Ambulance lights were visible through the windows, already waiting at the gate. If you're watching this and you're not subscribed yet, you need to hit that button right now. Because we're about to see justice served in a way that's going to be so satisfying. This story isn't over yet, and you don't want to miss what happens when they finally get off this plane. And here's what I want to know from you. Have you ever seen someone's online post backfire on them this spectacularly? Have you ever witnessed instant karma in real life? Share your stories in the comments because Veronica Ashford is about to learn that actions have consequences. The plane pulled up to the gate. EMTs were already boarding. And in seat 32C, Veronica Ashford sat with her head in her hands, her phone still buzzing with notifications, her perfect life falling apart one comment at a time. The captain's voice had already come through the intercom minutes earlier. calm and authoritative despite the urgency of the situation. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are making an emergency landing in Cleveland. We will be on the ground in approximately 20 minutes. Emergency medical services will be waiting at the gate. Please remain calm and follow all crew instructions. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for early descent and landing." 20 minutes. In 20 minutes this nightmare flight would be over. But those 20 minutes felt like an eternity. Sienna was stable now, thanks to Dr. Cross's expert care. The oxygen mask covered her small face, fogging slightly with each breath. Her eyes were open, tracking movement, aware of what was happening around her. The medication had dulled the worst of the pain, though you could still see it in the tension around her eyes, the way she held herself carefully, like any wrong movement might shatter her. Abigail hadn't let go of her hand. Not once. Not when Dr. Cross needed to check vitals. Not when Derek needed to adjust the oxygen flow. She just shifted her grip, held tighter, made sure Sienna knew she wasn't alone. As the plane descended, as Cleveland's skyline came into view through the windows, Abigail leaned close to her friend and whispered words that only Sienna could hear. "You're going to be okay. I've got you. I've always got you." Sienna turned her head slightly, the oxygen mask shifting. Her voice was weak, muffled by the plastic, but clear enough. "You're the bravest person I know." Abigail felt tears prick her eyes again. She wasn't brave. She was terrified. Had been terrified through all of this. But sometimes being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what needs to be done despite the fear. Mrs. Whitfield reached over, her arthritic hand covering both of theirs. Her face was streaked with tears, her eyes red and swollen from crying, but there was something else there now. Not just relief. Gratitude. Love so profound it hurt to witness. "You're an angel, baby. A real angel." Her voice cracked on the words. This woman who'd already lost so much, who'd buried her daughter, Sienna's mother, 3 years ago to breast cancer. Who'd taken in her granddaughter and become mother and grandmother both. Who'd worked double shifts at the diner to make ends meet. Who'd saved every penny for this flight, for this specialist appointment, for a chance at better care for her baby. She looked at Abigail like she was looking at a miracle. The plane banked, turning toward the runway. The seatbelt sign dinged on. Flight attendants moved through the cabin, checking that everyone was secure, that carry-ons were properly stowed. The normal pre-landing routine, but nothing about this was normal. And that's when Veronica made her move. She unbuckled her seatbelt, ignoring the seatbelt sign, ignoring Derek's immediate, "Ma'am, please remain seated," and stood up. She stepped across the aisle, her expensive heels catching slightly on the carpet. She looked different now. Her makeup was smudged, mascara tracking down her cheeks. Her hair, which had been perfect, was disheveled. Her designer blazer was wrinkled. She looked small suddenly. Diminished. She stopped in front of Mrs. Whitfield, wringing her hands together in a gesture that might have looked penitent if you didn't know what she'd done. I want to apologize." Her voice was soft, trembling slightly. She glanced around, aware of all the eyes on her, all the phones still recording. "I was stressed and I overreacted. The flight, the crowds, I wasn't thinking clearly. I'm sorry if I caused any distress." If she caused distress. Like there was any question. Like her actions were ambiguous. Mrs. Whitfield stared at her, jaw tight, but before she could respond, before she could decide whether to accept this hollow apology, Abigail stood up. She stepped between Veronica and Mrs. Whitfield, this tiny 12-year-old girl in her stained purple hoodie and light-up sneakers, and looked up at this grown woman with eyes that had seen too much today. "You weren't stressed. You were racist." The words hung in the air, clear and undeniable. "And you made a sick little girl's pain worse because you cared more about your comfort than her life. You called her diseased. You said she could have Ebola. You filmed her while she was in crisis and posted it online to mock her. You don't get to call that stress." Veronica's face flushed red. She opened her mouth, defensive, angry despite her attempt at apology. "I'm not racist. I have black friends, I donate to charity, Ma'am?" Trevor was standing now, his tall frame imposing in the narrow aisle. His voice was calm but carried the weight of professional authority. "I'd stop talking. Anything you say right now is being recorded by multiple people and will absolutely be used if Mrs. Whitfield decides to press charges. As her attorney, which I will be if she wants me to be, I'm advising you to return to your seat and speak to no one without legal representation." Veronica looked around wildly. At Trevor's phone, still recording. At Keisha's phone. At the phones of at least 5 other passengers, all pointed at her. At the cabin full of witnesses who'd seen everything, heard everything. Derek was there then, his kind demeanor completely gone, replaced by steel. "Ma'am, return to your seat for landing. Now, this is your final warning. If you don't comply, you will be met by law enforcement upon landing for failure to follow crew instructions, in addition to everything else." Everything else. The words carried weight. Threat. Promise. Veronica looked at Mrs. Whitfield one more time, maybe hoping for forgiveness, for mercy, for some acknowledgement of her apology. But Mrs. Whitfield just stared at her with an expression of such profound disappointment and disgust that Veronica actually flinched. She retreated to her seat, stumbling slightly. Gerald caught her arm, but his face showed no sympathy. Just mortification. The embarrassment of a man realizing his wife had destroyed their reputation, possibly their business, in the span of a single flight. As she buckled in, Veronica started crying. Real, ugly tears. Whether they were tears of remorse or just tears of self-pity for getting caught, no one could say. But they changed nothing. Dr. Cross, who'd been monitoring Sienna through all of this, finally stood and moved to where Abigail was settling back into her seat. She crouched down to be at eye level with this remarkable child. "Have you ever considered medicine as a career?" Abigail looked at her, this doctor who'd appeared like an answer to prayer, and nodded. "Every single day." Dr. Cross smiled, reached into her wallet and pulled out a business card. She handed it to Abigail with both hands, like she was passing on something sacred. "I run a youth medicine program at Boston Children's Hospital. It's competitive, it's demanding, but it's designed for young people exactly like you. When you're ready for high school, you call me. I'll make sure you have a spot." Abigail took the card, her hands trembling. She read it through tear-blurred eyes. Dr. Lillian Cross, MD. Director, Youth Medicine Initiative. Boston Children's Hospital. It felt like holding her future. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you," Dr. Cross replied. "You reminded me today why I became a doctor. To help people. And you did that better than most trained professionals I know." The plane's wheels touched down with a slight bump and screech of tires on tarmac. The engines roared in reverse thrust, slowing them down. Through the windows, Abigail could see the emergency vehicles, lights flashing, keeping pace with the plane. The cabin was silent except for the mechanical sounds of landing. Everyone was watching, waiting, holding their breath. The plane slowed, turned, pulled up to gate C-14. The moment it stopped, before the seatbelt sign could even ding off, the forward door was opening. EMTs rushed in with a stretcher, professional and efficient. Dr. Cross briefed them quickly, medical terminology flowing between professionals. Sienna was carefully transferred from her seat to the stretcher, the oxygen mask adjusted, vitals checked. She looked so small on that stretcher, this vibrant 11-year-old girl who just wanted to have an adventure reduced to a patient, a case number, a medical emergency. But she was conscious. She was stable. She was going to be okay. Mrs. Whitfield gathered their bags with shaking hands. Derek helped her, making sure they had everything. Trevor wrote down his phone number on the back of his own business card, pressed it into Mrs. Whitfield's hand. "Call me. For anything. I mean that." As the EMTs wheeled Sienna toward the exit, Abigail walked beside the stretcher, still holding her friend's hand through the side rail. And then something extraordinary happened. In the coach section, someone started clapping. Then another person. Then another. Within seconds, every single passenger in coach was standing and applauding. Not polite golf claps. Real applause. The kind that comes from witnessing something that restores your faith in humanity. They were applauding Abigail. This 12-year-old girl who'd stood up when others might have stayed silent. Who'd saved her friend's life with knowledge and courage. Who'd faced down adult hatred with simple, devastating truth. Abigail looked around at all these strangers, these witnesses, and felt overwhelmed. She wasn't a hero. She was just a kid who loved her friend. But to them, in that moment, she represented something bigger. Hope. Courage. The possibility that doing the right thing matters. The applause followed them down the aisle, out of the plane into the jetway. Even the gate agents joined in, having heard the whole story over their radios. Sienna, on the stretcher, managed a weak smile. "You're famous," she whispered. "Shut up," Abigail said, but she was smiling too, crying and smiling at the same time. Behind them, as the other passengers began to deplane, a different scene was unfolding. Airport police officers boarded the plane, their expressions serious. They went directly to seat 32C, where Veronica sat frozen, Gerald beside her looking like he wanted to disappear. "Veronica Ashford?" "Yes. We need you to come with us. We've received multiple complaints regarding your behavior on this flight." But I apologized. Ma'am, please stand up and come with us. Other passengers were filing past and they saw it happen. Saw Veronica being escorted off by police while Derek and 3 other passengers followed to give statements. Saw Gerald trailing behind on his phone with what was probably their lawyer. Keisha made sure to get photos. This was news. Real news. Not just viral social media drama, but a story about racism, about courage, about consequences. She'd already written half the article in her head. In the terminal, she approached Mrs. Whitfield with professional courtesy but genuine empathy. Ma'am, I'm Keisha Monroe, Boston Herald. I'd love to interview you and Abigail if you're willing. With your permission, of course. I think people need to hear this story. The real story, not just the viral video. Mrs. Whitfield looked at the EMTs, who were preparing to transport Sienna to the hospital. Can it wait? My granddaughter. Of course. Here's my card. When you're ready, whenever that is, you call me. But then she turned to Abigail, this journalist who'd seen so much cynicism in her career, and she smiled. Can I ask you just one question? What made you stand up to that woman? Abigail thought about it. Thought about all the complicated feelings, the fear, the anger, the love. But when she answered, it was simple. True. Because Sienna would do it for me. Because it was right. And because being scared of someone doesn't mean you don't stand up anyway. Keisha wrote it down word for word. That quote would be the headline. She knew it immediately. The EMTs were ready to go. Mrs. Whitfield kissed Abigail's forehead one more time. You coming to the hospital, baby? Try and stop me. They walked together through the Cleveland airport, this unlikely group. An 11-year-old girl on a stretcher. Her grandmother. Her 12-year-old best friend. EMTs. Dr. Cross, who decided to accompany them to make sure the handoff to the hospital went smoothly. Trevor, who'd rearranged his entire schedule to make sure Mrs. Whitfield had legal support. Keisha, who knew a story that mattered when she saw one. Behind them, left behind in every sense, Veronica Ashford sat in an airport security office watching her life implode on multiple screens. Her social media was a nightmare. Her business phone was ringing off the hook with cancellations. Her personal email was flooded with thousands of messages. News outlets were picking up the story. Real estate developer films sick child in crisis, posts racist content, was trending across multiple platforms. Her lawyer was on speakerphone and he sounded exhausted. Veronica, you need to issue a public apology immediately. A real one. And you need to take serious steps toward making this right. Sensitivity training. Donations to sickle cell organizations. Public accountability. Maybe you can salvage something from this. But she'd broken something that couldn't be easily fixed. Trust. Reputation. The benefit of the doubt. You don't film a sick child in crisis and mock them online and get that back with an apology. The internet doesn't forget. And it doesn't forgive easily. 3 days later, Sienna walked into Dr. Patricia Okonkwo's office at Boston Children's Hospital. She was still sore, still tired, but she was walking. She was smiling. And Abigail was right beside her, where she'd been every single moment since the crisis. Dr. Okonkwo was one of the best pediatric hematologists in the country, and she had a treatment plan that gave real hope. Better medication management. Potential clinical trials. A path forward that didn't have to include so much pain. Abigail sat through the entire appointment, taking notes, asking questions, making sure she understood every detail. Mrs. Whitfield cried happy tears this time, grateful tears because maybe, finally, her baby would have a chance at a normal life. 2 weeks later, Veronica Ashford held a press conference. She read from a prepared statement, apologizing for her behavior, announcing her enrollment in racial sensitivity training, pledging donations to multiple organizations supporting sickle cell research and treatment. She looked tired. Defeated. Her company had lost 40% of its contracts. Her reputation was destroyed. But you know what? She'd earned every bit of it. 6 months later, Abigail received a thick envelope in the mail. The Youth Medicine Initiative at Boston Children's Hospital. An invitation to join the next cohort. A full scholarship. A letter from Dr. Cross that said simply, I knew it the moment I met you. Welcome to medicine. Abigail and Sienna remain best friends. They're 14 now. Sienna's on a better treatment regimen and has been pain crisis-free for 8 months. Abigail volunteers at her local children's hospital every weekend, spending time with pediatric patients, especially those with chronic illnesses. She keeps Dr. Cross's business card in her wallet, right next to a photo of her and Sienna on the plane, taken by Keisha right before they took off for the hospital. In the photo, Abigail is holding Sienna's hand, and you can see everything in their faces. fear, love, courage, hope. Sometimes the smallest voices speak the loudest truths. Sometimes a 12-year-old girl in light-up sneakers can change the world, or at least one corner of it, just by refusing to be silent in the face of cruelty. Sometimes standing up is scary and hard and feels impossible. But you do it anyway. Because it's right. Because someone you love needs you. Because the alternative, staying silent, is worse than any fear. If this story moved you, if it made you think about your own courage, hit that subscribe button right now. Share this story. Let people know that standing up matters. That kids can be heroes. That doing the right thing even when it's hard is always worth it. And here's my final question for you. If you were in Abigail's position, would you have the courage to stand up? Or would you stay silent and hope someone else does it? Think about it honestly. And then think about what you want the answer to be next time you face that choice. Because we all face that choice eventually. Let me know in the comments what you do. Abigail would tell you it's not about being fearless. It's about being afraid and standing up anyway. And maybe that's the most important lesson of all.